This video is brought to you with the support of TrueFire. Learn, practice, and play with TrueFire. Hi, this is Keith Williams. Welcome to 5 Watt World, learn just to help you get the most music from the least gear. Dumble amplifiers. Alexander Dumble. D-style. Utter these magic words and the guitar world turns to listen. But what really is a Dumble amp? Likely when you hear the word Dumble, you think of Robben Ford, Larry Carlton, Joe Bonamassa, or John Mayer, and the mythic Overdrive specials. But Alexander Dumble built a lot of very different amplifiers in a number of very different styles. And since most of us will likely never see one, let alone get to play one, I thought I'd better pull together a short history video so we can at least talk about them with a better understanding of that variety. If that appeals to you, then stay tuned, because this is the 5 Watt World short history of Dumble amplifiers. If you enjoy our videos, make sure to subscribe, or grab a t-shirt, hoodie, or a Stomp preset pack to support what we do. And to become a bigger part of 5 Watt World, sign up for the Friends of 5 Watt on Patreon. The links are in the description. Howard Alexander Dumble was born on June 1st, 1944, and grew up in the music-rich town of Bakersfield, California. He began playing around with electronics early and was selling scratch-built transistor radios to friends at school by the time he was 12. In high school, when the Youth Baseball League needed a PA system, Dumble put one together from a pile of parts that had been donated. It turned out so well that it convinced him to build an amp for himself that was based on a Fender Dual Showman. He was a big fan of Les Paul and Mary Ford, and that inspired him to begin playing guitar around the time he was 16. Often overlooked when talking about Dumble, he was an excellent guitarist and bassist. When he got to LA in the late 60s, he was good enough to get both studio and touring gigs on guitar and bass, notably with songwriter Jimmy Webb and folk rock artist Buffy Sainte-Marie. But back in Bakersfield, his love of the band The Ventures led him to building an amp on speculation for his heroes. The guys in the band thought that the amp was a little too rock for their style, but the guy that built their guitars, Sammy Mosley of Bakersfield-based Mosrite Guitars, thought the amp was amazing and hired Dumble to build some prototypes. After putting together about a dozen prototypes and after looking at the deal Mosley offered, Dumble decided he'd rather continue to play music and build designs of his own. After moving from Santa Cruz to North Hollywood, Dumble would be hired by record companies to prep the gear for an act that was about to go on the road to improve its dependability. In this way, he built a reputation for bulletproofing gear, and that work would carry over into the design and construction of his own amps later on. This work put him in touch with the band Little Feat. Their guitarist, Lowell George, was playing an amp that he didn't particularly love. While working with him, Dumble simply told him, "I should build an amp for you." And one of the earliest Dumbles was out being played by Lowell on the road. A tour playing bass with Buffy Sainte-Marie in '68 provided the money he needed to buy the equipment to set up his own shop. Here he began building his own designs, beginning with a bass head he called the Dumble Land. His first guitar-specific model, the Explosion, was built in '69, and it would evolve into the first Overdrive specials by '72. This is also how the young Alexander got to know Jackson Browne and David Lindley. He began working very closely with them both, eventually moving into a building on Jackson's estate. For years, he focused on their amp needs and really honed his skills of designing an amp to fit the playing style of the guitarist, and it was during this time he began building the Overdrive specials. To hear the quintessential example of one of those early ODS amps, check out David Lindley's lap steel solo on Browne's Running on Empty. It is a tone that soars over the live band and helped propel the song to the top of the charts. The Overdrive Special, or ODS, is essentially a 2-channel, both clean and high-gain amp with either 2 or 4 6L6 tubes in the power section for 50 or 100 watts respectively. It has a cascading gain stage preamp with a power section similar to the one found in a Fender Bassman, but with substantial and evolving tweaks over time. The clean channel is often cited for its highly responsive, transparent, and open sound. The Overdrive channel is widely viewed as the ultimate example of tube-generated overdrive. Harmonically rich, fat, creamy, and above all, touch-sensitive. Though the amp started out as a modified 60s Bassman, it evolved to become something original. Over the years, it went through multiple generations of preamp designs. Its construction is different than mass-produced amps, not just for the high quality of the components used, but also for the meticulous routing of the signal path, parts placement, and clean wire dress. Which brings up one of the key points I wanted to make about Dumbles. It's almost misleading that Dumble used the same names to describe his amps over time. This is not like a Fender Deluxe Reverb, where even as construction methods changed over the decades from hand-wired eyelet boards to printed circuit boards, Fender was trying to recreate the exact same circuit. The similarities between Overdrive specials are in broad strokes, and each and every amp is different. This was true even before Dumble settled into building amps voiced for the individual player. How could it be otherwise? Dumble's knowledge of amplifiers and the tuning of his ears was evolving as he built each slightly tweaked design. And if you think of it this way, it makes perfect sense that when some people plug into a specific Dumble, they aren't always blown away. I'd bet that their playing style, their choice of guitar, the output of their pickups, etc., the whole equation, just doesn't work with that particular amp. It also explains the opposite reaction. I've read repeatedly that players said, "This is the best Dumble I've ever played." Buyer psychology aside, if that's even possible, it seems to me that someone buying a Dumble used sometimes comes across the one that speaks their language, that responds just as they'd imagined it would. Ultimately, like Ken Fisher over at Trainwreck, Dumble was trying to create amps that were instruments of interaction, amps that completed the circuit of player, guitar, and sound of amp. Early in the 1980s, Robben Ford had a chance to play an Overdrive special that was owned by a studio rental company in LA. He was so taken with it that every time he was going to make a record, he'd rent the amp. He eventually found the money to order his own ODS and set up a meeting with Dumble to place the order. At that meeting, Dumble famously told Robben that the sound of the ODS had actually been inspired when he saw Robben playing with the Ford Brothers Band while living up in Santa Cruz. Robben had been playing through a cranked piggyback 60s Bassman rig, and it was Robben's tone on that rig that Dumble had set out to capture in the ODS. The amp Dumble built for Robben in 81-82 is Overdrive Special No. 102, a 100-watter with 4 6L6s in the power section and 3 70-25 tubes in the preamp. Ford said of the amp from the beginning that amplifier was perfect for me. I mean, perfect. In the 90s, Ford would order another ODS. Originally ordered as a 45-watt amp, after using it on the road, he realized that he'd become accustomed to the headroom of a 100-watt amp and sent it back to Dumble to be reworked into a 100-watt version. This amp served as part of Ford's rig in Europe for decades until he recently decided to sell it. Over the years, the amp had become very valuable, both because of its rarity and because of its association with Ford. But Ford did not want to profit from Dumble's reputation, and so, out of respect for Dumble, Ford turned to Dumble to decide who should own the amp. Once the buyer and the price were agreed upon, Ford split the proceeds of the sale with Dumble, 60-40. Of course, Robben Ford's entire catalog, from 1988's Talk to Your Daughter through 2015's Into the Sun, has featured his original Dumble Overdrive Special and 2x12 cab loaded with 1980s Celestion 65 speakers. Ford's recently released Live at Yoshi's, 96, shows Robben playing his classic rig, Overdrive Special, Dumble Later, and TC Electronics 2290 delay, and all. The cover of the album speaks for the showcase of the amp's tones to be found inside. When most people say, "It sounds like a Dumble," they're really saying, "It sounds like Robben Ford's Dumble." It's become the generic tone associated with Alexander Dumble's work, but it is far, far from the only great tones he created. I reached out to TrueFire to be my sponsor because I've used them for years. With over 2 million users worldwide, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced level player, TrueFire has lessons to enhance and inspire your playing. Get 35% off courses using the promo code 5watt35, or like I do, sign up for the All Access Pass to use the entire TrueFire catalog. I really like TrueFire, and I think if you give them a shot, you'll like them too. Sign up now to start your journey to being a better guitarist. I'd like to thank TrueFire for their support in making this video. As I mentioned earlier, the high level of customization might well be one of the reasons that Dumble amps are sometimes described as unforgiving or unflattering of a player's style. Anyone other than the original owner might well have a hard time dialing in the amp to fit their playing. There's a famous story of when Robben Ford and Larry Carlton, two of the most famous Dumble players, were out on the road touring together. For fun, they each plugged into each other's Overdrive Special, only to have a visceral reaction to how much it just felt wrong, and wanting to switch back to their own amps immediately. The beginning of his career, Dumble took orders wherever he could get them. But as his reputation grew, and it was clear that he would only build 2 or 3 amps a year, he began interviewing prospective clients. As it was, you couldn't get in the door with Dumble without an introduction from someone that he had worked with before. It became something of an audition where Dumble was deciding if he wanted to collaborate with you on your sound, and at the same time, he was listening for how he might best do that. Slide player Sonny Landreth, who bought his first Dumble in '95, said, "He tweaked mine to grab the harmonic character that stems from my fingerstyle approach and palm techniques, basically to enhance what I was doing. It was a deeply personal thing for him, a bond." It seems that Dumble was fascinated with designing amps that create a connection, that provided a feel for the musician that inspired them to play their best. That connection is something that the folks that get to play Dumbles often mention. Drew Berlin was friends with Dumble for over 30 years, and he said in an interview, "It wasn't about the money, and it wasn't about the person's fame. It was about Alexander wanting to add to someone's creativity. If he heard their playing and thought he could do that, then he did." It's for this reason that he would also on occasion rework an amp to fit a player if an amp was purchased used and the player was someone that Dumble respected, as he did for Carlos Santana with his Overdrive reverb. Though his amps had become a local secret weapon among studio guys in LA in the 80s, Dumble's association with Brown and Lindley brought him much wider recognition, and players with much higher name recognition began playing his amps. Folks like Stevie Ray Vaughan, Christopher Cross, Eric Johnson, Bonnie Raitt, and Carlos Santana. In '82, Stevie Ray Vaughan was tracking in Jackson Browne's studio and used a Dumble Land bass head for his clean tones on tracks that would end up on Texas Flood. This would lead to SRV ordering his own steel string singer, the quintessential clean platform amp that is now also beloved by players like John Mayer. That steel string singer at Jackson Browne's studio would also later be played by Eric Johnson, and it would lead him to ordering his own steel string singer. That singer was a 150-watt amp using 6550 output tubes to provide the maximum amount of headroom. You can hear SRV playing his own steel string singer on his recording of Little Wing on the Sky is Crying album. Another great place to hear it is on Eric Johnson's clean tones on Avia Musicom. But again, remember, they were both 100 and 150 watt steel string singers, and though there might have been as few as a dozen total built, each is different, and each was tailored to fit the player and the job at hand. And because many of the amps didn't have onboard reverb, the Dumbleator was born, a tube-driven effects loop for inserting and balancing outboard effects like reverb and delay with the amp. In the 80s, the 100-watt ODS heads were priced at $1,925, while other custom options and bigger amps could run up to $5,000. But in the 90s, with demand for his amps soaring, Dumble adopted a 3-tiered pricing structure based on how soon you wanted to have the amp. Modern Dumble devotees include Slash, Keith Urban, Kirk Hammett, Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Jason Isbell, Eric Clapton, and Joe Bonamassa. Bonamassa has been very publicly buying and selling various ODSs for the past 10 years, now settling on 50-watt ODS combos as his current favorites, which he blends with his high-powered Tweed Twin signature amps on stage. Bonamassa's first Dumble was often referred to as the Robben Ford rig, a 100-watt ODS head, Dumbleator, and a TC Electronics 2290 delay and 2x12 cab, in this case with Dumble's favorite speakers in it, 200-watter EV 12Ls. Bonamassa is currently running his own signature 85-watt signature speakers in his Dumble combos. Given how rare the amps are, direct experience with a Dumble is few and far between. One of my favorite guitar history writers, Dave Hunter, has had a chance to play 4 different Dumbles, including Robben Ford's amp. Hunter recalled, "The first time I played a Dumble was about 25 years ago in the studio of a friend. I was cynical going in, figuring it couldn't possibly live up to the hype, and well, how wrong I was. A Dumble wasn't my sound, yet it was instantly one of the most expressive and dynamic lead-voiced amps I'd ever played through. I'll never forget the feeling of that connectedness." Later in his career, Dumble also created mods to classic amps. One of these was a high-gain mod called the HRM, or Hot Rubber Monkey. He also did complex mods to non-Dumble designs, which he called Rockphonics, which was a high-gain mod, and Ultraphonics, which added some of the hi-fi Dumble magic to existing designs. Hi-fi are the words most often used to describe the sound of any Dumble. That all the frequencies are there, but all of them are balanced at the same time. Producer Dave Cobb had the chance to play some Dumbles when he was working in LA, and through mutual acquaintances was able to meet Dumble at his home to talk amps. Dumble hadn't heard him play before, so asked Dave what he wanted to try. Cobb plugged the Gretsch White Penguin he'd brought with him into a modified Fender Deluxe amp from the mid-60s.
This is probably my Desert Island amplifier. This is just a regular old Deluxe, mid-60s Deluxe amp. Got introduced to Alexander Dumble. When I was at his house, I played one of these that he modified, and it just knocked me out. I mean, it was just the most hi-fi 3D sound I'd ever heard. He completely gutted this thing. Did his own. He has a mod, Ultraphonics, I think is what he calls it. He gutted it. He got crazy on it, and it just is magic. It's 3D.
Wow.
And he changed the speaker out. I think he put a greenback in it. And
like a new greenback?
Yeah.
You can hear Cobb's amp on records he's made with Chris Stapleton, Sturgill Simpson, and Marcus King. Specifically, the amp was used to record the slide parts on Jason Isbell's tune Cover Me Up from his hit record Southeastern. The Ultraphonics mod that we're talking about here is both about changing in component values and in the actual layout. Often the output transformer is replaced with one that is more capable of handling the full range of frequencies from the amp. When pushed, the circuits have both the flavor of a 60s and 70s style amp, but when the gain is wound up, they have some of the flavor of the Brown and Tweed amps that came before them. Nearly all the components are changed, and most users describe them as everything they liked about the original amp, but the new amp just had more of everything. Another interesting amp that Dumble enjoyed building later in his life was what's been called the Ultraphonics and Gain. Often built using a 70s silver panel bassman, one channel was his Dumble's Hi-Fi Ultraphonics clean voice, while the other channel was a version of a high-gain amp, often a modded and modern Marshall. From the front, you might think that it's still a 70s bassman, but all of that Dumble goodness is under the hood. It's also in this way that there are some other amps that I think of as sleeper Dumbles out in the world. Two recent Premier Guitar rig rundowns highlighted these amps that were built for Kenny Wayne Shepherd and Eric Clapton.
So this is a slightly different setup than I've been running, but these are all Dumble amplifiers. Before he passed away, he and I became very close. He built me 11 amplifiers over the course of our friendship.
Wow.
And this is 3 of them. And what I really liked about it is that, these are like, I'm a car guy, and in the hot rod world, we have what you call a sleeper. But under the hood, that is 100% Dumble. He would take these amps, he basically used the cabinet and the chassis, and then everything else was taken out. Transformers, the circuit, everything, he would hand wire all that stuff from scratch. So,
wow.
They're just kind of in appearance Fender, but inside under the hood, it's 100% Dumble.
So the Bandmaster, 57 reissue Bandmaster, the Tweed. But there is these were built for him by Alexander Dumble.
Oh.
But to Fender spec.
Okay.
But he's done it meticulously. So
did Dumble start with the stock Fender amp and then tweak it from there, or did he build it from the ground up?
He started with the chassis and he's built it to
At the beginning of this project, I knew that I wouldn't be able to play an actual Dumble amp myself, let alone spend the amount of time I like to get to know a piece of gear. I did have multiple offers from guys who own Dumbles, but none of these owners were anywhere nearby. I'm also not that interested in increasing the mythos surrounding Dumbles. Lord knows it doesn't need any help from me. I'm more interested in learning about gear that is, at least, more accessible than actual Dumbles. I did the same thing when I made the video about Trainwreck amps by checking out Dr. Z's Z-Wreck Juniors that had just come out at the time. Though Dumble spent the majority of his life building amps for specific players, the number of amps still in the hands of the original owners is growing smaller every year. So the amps are no longer being played with the hands and gear for which they were designed. Coupled with the very high prices of the originals today, I became interested in finding a company that was trying to reproduce some of the magic of the designs and were relatively affordable. Of course, affordable is a completely relative term, but I think these amps are in line with the fewer and better philosophy of 5-watt world. An amp like this can be used for a lot of different jobs. All of this led me to looking at Amplified Nation. Taylor Cox originally got pulled into the Dumble-style amp world, building replacement-style cabinets in his apartment. This hide hustle grew until guys were sending him their Dumbles and Trainwreck amps to be measured and recabbed. Not only did he get to spend time playing these amps, but he gained a lot of first-hand experience inside the amps as well. Famously, Dumble gooped, or covered in epoxy resin, his circuit boards to keep his designs private. It's also been said that this might have gone all the way back to making gear more roadworthy, as it would hold all the parts in place. But by the early 2000s, someone had ungooped Overdrive Special number 124 and began sharing information about the circuit, eventually leading to publishing a schematic and a layout of the amp. By the time Taylor became interested in trying to build some amps, the Amp Garage forum was abuzz with information and speculation about the different generations of Overdrive Specials and about some of the other designs. Cox became intrigued by the mystery, or as he said to me on a phone call, the alchemy and the reverence folks seem to have for these amps. There are a number of companies that make Overdrive Special style amps. Two-Rock, Bluetooth and Fuchs come to mind right away, some more expensive and some less. But Amplified Nation offers a wider variety of amps, and they were all being interpreted by the same designer builder. Because although Amplified Nation builds amps in this style, they are not exact clones of original or specific Dumble amps. Cox has added features at the request of players to modernize the amps, most noticeably adding reverb to many designs. Amplified Nation has been building amps now since 2011, and he'd be the first one to tell you that both his knowledge and his hearing have improved over time. Add to this that Taylor was wise enough to have his amps demoed by R.G. Ronquillo, someone that has the jazz background stirred together with rock chops that these circuits are known for. By using one player to demo the different amps, I was able to narrow down the variables yet again. Agree with my approach or not? That's cool. But after thinking about this video for a number of years, I felt that this would provide the best overall history and best audio examples available. About 15 years ago, I went through a period of building tube amps, and apropos the name of the channel, this included a batch of 5-watters. A variety of preamps got coupled to the power section of a Fender Champ running a single 6v6. I built a classic 60s Champ with the addition of a TMB tone stack. I built a 5-watt Marshall Silver Jubilee, and I built a 5-watt Overdrive Special. In all of these cases, Dan Lurie of FYD designed the amps. I built them, and then he'd fix them to make them run. Now, I am not an amp tech, nor an electrical engineer. Far from it. I used to joke that, you know those paint-by-numbers pictures? Yeah, I'm a build like the picture sort of guy. Give me a detailed layout, and that's what you'll get back. So the thing that has stuck with me about that D-style build was how different it looked inside. The different locations of some of the parts. Like a strip over by the tube socket holding parts that would usually live on the circuit board with a wire flying over there. It spoke of a level of rethinking, how amps are put together, that left me fascinated by the mind that created them. Add to that my 3-decade-long fascination with Robben Ford's guitar tone, and like many of you, I imagine I will always be intrigued by the unique tones possible with these instruments. Because instruments are what they are. To paraphrase Pat Metheny, the amp is the only place in your electric guitar rig that makes noise. I'll add that it's also the link to your ears, and to the ears of your audience. And there is no more important part of your rig than that. If I missed your favorite part of the Dumble amp story, please put it in the comments for everyone to enjoy. I know from experience that I can count on you. If you like this video, you probably would enjoy my video on the Trainwreck amps by Ken Fisher. I need to thank Jeff Mackerlane for connecting me with Tracy Farmer a couple of years ago. Tracy had traded away some very, very nice old guitars to acquire a very rare 50-watt ODS combo. On top of that, Tracy regularly gigs his Dumble in a blues rock band in bars. Along with his 66 Strat and vintage tellies, I don't imagine he wanders very far from the stage when the band takes a break. And in addition, Tracy lent me his copy of the increasingly rare A Dumble Book by Jess Schwartz. These are getting expensive on the used market, so if you have one, take care of it. I need to thank Taylor Cox from Amplified Nation for taking the time to walk me through the history of how he became interested in D-style amps, his approach to growing his business, and his philosophy on building on the legacy of other designers, much like all amp builders have done before him. It's always a pleasure for me to get to wade through playing examples by R.J. Ronquillo, and this project had me doing a lot of that. I think we're all thankful for RJ's playing and for the way it fits this wonderful variety of amplifiers. I also need to thank the guys at Premier Guitar for their permission to use the clips from rig rundown videos where there were Dumbles on stage or in a studio that helped me tell the story here. In addition, editor Jason Shadrick's excellent article on Dumble that came out shortly after Dumble's passing was a great resource. The links to the full videos are in the description. I want to thank everyone that stopped by the store and picked up a hoodie, a hat, a t-shirt, or a Stomp preset pack. And in particular, I need to thank the Friends of 5 Watt on Patreon. It's the guitar community I've always wanted. You're all 5 Watt world. I just make the videos. If you enjoyed this short history of the Dumble amplifiers, hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that too on your way out. Thanks for hanging with me until the end. Until next time, I'm Keith Williams. Thanks for being a part of the 5 Watt world.